Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to this month's webinar, and I'm honored and it's my great pleasure to have my wonderful associate Michal Offer with me. Michal's in Montreal and I'm in Alberta, and both of us are in Canada. And this is a subject and a topic which is very close to our hearts because, well, to our minds as well, because we see so many people suffering through this. And, the some of the effects of food and, mental health, it may not even be like, you may not even have a huge diagnosis of severe depression or bipolar or anything. But even in your day-to-day life, you might have noticed how much of an impact food has. Simple things like the one of the commonest that comes to my mind is gluten. So getting stopping gluten containing food, and Michal will talk about stopping gluten containing food and going gluten free. That has made a huge difference in the lives of so many people. It's like brain fog is gone, and bloating, and this is gone, and pain has gone, and joint pain has gone. And sometimes people don't relate how they are feeling with what they're eating. So yes, Michal, you're going to pull up a study that you came across recently.
Yes, and it's a study that doesn't apply to everybody, but I just saw it this morning. And it's a PubMed study that was published very recently. And it's called Meat and Mental Health, a meta-analysis of meat consumption, depression, and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And the studies it was a meta-analysis, which means it studied other studies. And they took 20 studies and it represented 171,000, almost 172,000 people, with 157,000 meat consumers and 13,000 meat abstainers. And what they found was, oh goodness.
Anyway, can you share your slide, your screen?
No,
okay.
Because I have it on my phone.
Okay, so anyway, we'll post it
on my computer. But yeah, but what they found is that although many people who don't eat meat substitutes, and they understand that meat substitutes are not good for their mental health, and they do, what people don't understand often is that consuming animal product, and I think it's the saturated fat specifically in the animal product, and the bioavailable omega-3 really has a direct impact, a positive impact on the brain, whereas these processed foods have a negative impact. These are foods that have a positive impact.
Thank you, Michal. And so we are going to discuss this a little bit more in details of what to look at when anyone is reading something on the internet. So I'm going to just start with a PowerPoint because, as you know, I cannot do without a PowerPoint. I wish there was a better way, but I haven't found one to stay on track. And so all of you can ask your questions at the end of it when I can unmute you. You will not be seen, but you will only be heard. Okay, here I am. So the most important questions that we'd like to answer is, number one, are your food choices causing mental health challenges? Now, in my world of health and wellness, and Michal's world, causing is something, it's not always easy to prove. That is one thing. The next is, can you use food as treatment for mental health conditions? So these are the two important questions that both of us, we hope to answer today. So when we look at food, is food causing mental health challenges? Now, most important point is, of course, everything is related to what are you eating. So depending on what you're eating is going to be important, whether that is causative or it is contributory in any way. So my suggestion is, don't bother with all those terms, but it's in the nerd world, you can get very deep down into, is it causative, is it association? Number one point is, what is missing from your food today, which was there probably before? And it's not just important of what is missing from your food today, it's also what is your requirement. Now, if your requirement is very high and your food alone is not meeting that, even eating a super clean diet, you feel that I'm not eating any of the processed food, I'm not eating sugar, I'm not eating this, I'm not drinking a lot of alcohol. Why do I feel the way I do? It is possible that there are a whole bunch of nutrients that are missing, even from very good quality food. And that is probably causing a problem. The next is, what are the things that are present in food which could be causing a problem with your, with your anxiety, with your depression, even with very serious conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, any of those. One book, if you were to read just one book and nothing else, this is the one I would recommend. And on Tuesday, this is 7 p.m. Mountain Time, I will be in conversation with one of the authors, Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. So Dr. Kaplan is an experimental psychologist. Dr. Julia Rutledge is in New Zealand. Both of them are researchers. So they are not, they don't make money selling supplements or anything like that. And they have done years of research and come up with these excellent, this excellent research work. And now I think there are more than about 40 papers between and over the years. And the best part about this book is it is very simple, easy to understand language, and there's nothing complex for anyone to understand. And I'm not going to, spoil it for you, because if you can join us on Tuesday at 7 p.m., it'll be great. If not, because I know that's not the right time for many of you because of time zones, there will be a recording, which will take probably a few weeks to post. But this is one book I highly, highly recommend. And there was so much I learned from the book. So when going back to what is missing from your food, now I must thank Bonnie for this wonderful, picture. So this is, now you know that serotonin and tryptophan, these are important for various things. Mood issues is one of them. But however, I must stress upon this: serotonin and tryptophan are not the only things that impact your mood. But this is just an example. So you can see from here, there are, just ignore the very complex names of all these things, but just focus on the green stuff. So yes, focus on the green stuff, actually. So you can see the names of different vitamins: iron, calcium, phosphorus, potassium. All these different nutrients are necessary for you to make let us say, to make serotonin. So if you are deficient in any of these, the most important question is, if you are eating food that does not contain any of these, number one, it does not contain at all, or it does not contain in significant quantity for it to have an impact on how you, on the making of any of these products, any of these chemicals in your body. Or these are like, so many different cofactors are necessary, and you will find Bonnie talking about cofactors very often. So if these are missing from the food that you're eating, and there is no simple way to know whether they are missing. One thing I can, Michal and I can tell you, most of these cofactors are not there in processed food. In your cookies and your, biscuits and pizzas and burgers and bread and all those things, none of these are there. Sometimes you may find, and Michal, maybe if you have time, we'll talk a little bit about, reading food labels. They have that little thing, enriched with something, something. What does it mean really? Anyway, going back to what is missing from your food, the other thing I want to highlight here is, when you need so many different things for your body to make, let us say, serotonin, and you are going to take a supplement which only contains zinc, or you're going to eat some food that is just high only in zinc, and that too, you can't eat that every day. What do you think is going to happen? Like, what about all the other nutrients? And this is the problem, even with a lot of clinical studies, when they look at single ingredients. So single ingredients will not work, because this is the reason. Just let us say, just supplementing with zinc, when you forget about iron, which is a very common deficiency, or all the B vitamins, then zinc alone is not going to do everything for you. Next, okay, what about, do we have studies which show? So Mikhail was talking about the meat study. So this is one where they looked at, and this was in many different countries. You can see there are 32 different countries, some first world countries, some developing countries, some low income group countries, lots of different countries in kids 12 to 15 years of age. And you can see from this graphic that those who ate fast food, they had so prevalence of suicide attempts over 1 year was higher in those who had more fast food in the last 7 days. So they looked at people, these kids, they asked their food history for the last 1 week, and they looked at suicide history for 1 year, and they found that this is one of the problems. And this is really serious, because another paper which came out, I think, Mikhail, it was a few weeks ago, about 67% of what kids are eating today is not food. We call that food-like substances. So is it any wonder that, and again, I'm not saying that's the only cause. Is it any wonder that the problem of mental health has gone up so much, and particularly amongst the young? That is something that really bothers me, because very often these young people, because they're going through some mental health challenges, which is probably caused by the food they are not eating, and lack of sleep and all those things, they are being treated by potentially rather toxic medications, which don't always help. That is what concerns me. I'm not against medication or anything. Yes, you need medications for some conditions, absolutely, for sure. But do you need prescription medications as the first line? I do not agree with that. And I know, Mikhail, you will agree with me with that. Next comes, and here, Mikhail, I'm going to let you respond as well. So what about veganism, vegetarian diet, and depression? So few things we have to understand is, when we say, is it associated, is it causative? Sometimes we need studies which have to look at causation, but most of the time, and particularly with food studies, one of the problems is how you do the study. So you ask people what they're eating. So we call that the food recall or food frequency questionnaire. Now, is veganism, vegetarianism a problem? Again, everything goes back to the quality of your food and whether you are adding the supplements that you are missing out. So it's inconclusive. Some studies have shown that there is higher depression, lower anxiety. Some have shown that it may be protective against depressive symptoms. But the bottom line is, it will always matter what you're comparing with. So let us say someone had a very poor quality diet, lots of bread and pasta and pizza and processed food and sugar, and then they switched to a vegan diet. That would definitely make a huge difference, versus someone who's already eating lot of meat and fish and everything, and then they decide that they want to become vegan because of various reasons. That is going to be different. The most important point is, one diet does not apply to everyone. So you need to listen to your own body, and you need someone to help you figure out what works for you. So again, a lot of people, I usually ask, so in India, there are a lot of people who are vegetarians because they're vegetarians by birth. And they are not vegetarians in the strict sense. Most of them are actually grainitarians. But if I know that someone was not a vegetarian before and they've switched to become a vegetarian, my usual question is, are you doing it for your health? Are you doing it for other ethical reasons or anything like that? And Mikhail, believe it or not, many people will tell me they think that going vegan or vegetarian is healthier, and I see their lab numbers all over the place. So that's just something I wanted to, Mikhail, I'm going to just stop sharing the screen, and I'll let you address the question of vegetarianism, because that is very important.
Okay, so I found one of the studies. There were two studies. I found it on my computer, and I will share my screen because that way we can read it together. And it's just part of the study. Do you see my screen, Dr. Carr?
Yes, I do. Okay, yeah.
So the name of the study is Meat and Mental Health, a systemic review of meat abstention and depression, anxiety, and related phenomena. Now, What's important here was that, again, it's a meta-analysis. So they studied 18 studies, and what they note this, so if you guys want to read it all, you can, but they note that not all the studies were of equal, were as good as each other. Some were more associative and some were more causative. And they broke it down. And you can see it says, analysis of methodologic rigor revealed that studies ranged from low to severe risk of bias with very low confidence, with high to very low confidence in results. 11 of the 18 studies demonstrated that meat abstention was associated. So that doesn't mean causative. So that could be a food questionnaire again, was associated with poorer psychological health. 4 studies were equivocal. They showed nothing. And 3 showed that meat abstainers had better outcomes with mental health. The most rigorous studies, so these are the ones when you get into the study that actually did randomized control studies, demonstrated the prevalence or risk of depression and or anxiety was significantly greater in participants who avoided meat consumption. So the evidence is mixed, but and it's probably also quite diluted depending on what the meat diet is and what the vegan vegetarian diet is. What I will say from personal experience is vegetarianism and veganism are very different, incredibly different.
Yeah.
And veganism in the short term, especially as you had said, when you're coming from a grain-filled, processed-filled diet and you go into this whole raw food vegan diet, you feel amazing because you're taking out all of the rubbish. But in the long term, it is incredibly, incredibly challenging to maintain optimal health. That's mental, physical, psychological, spiritual, all of it on a vegan diet. Vegetarian diets, no matter how you break them down, tend to have some animal product in them. And that seems to make a huge amount of difference on many levels. I know we're talking mental health today, but what is good for your brain is also going to be good for your heart and your lungs and your kidneys and your stomach. Your body is a system. So that's just been my experience. And here we have a study that seems to, and it was published relatively recently, April 2020. And again, it really shows that there is a definite, if nothing else, there is a definite relationship between food and mental health.
Oh, yeah. That I think is undisputed. So next I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Now going back to what is missing. So with vegetarian and maybe Mikhail, what I would suggest is, will you just, for the sake of clarity, define what when you said that there are sometimes animal products in vegetarian diets versus vegan. So will you just explain a little bit about the differences between the two?
So vegan diets mean no animal product at all, which means no dairy, no eggs, no meat, chicken, fish, all of that. When traditionally, when we thought of vegetarian diets, we thought of no meat. So people could eat, and it depends on the diet, people could eat eggs or could eat dairy because those weren't considered meats. They're byproducts of the animal. A vegan diet includes none of those, zero, nothing. Which really does change the fat composition of the diet, which I'm sure I know we've spoken about many times before as well. A vegetarian diet just means no meat. So I know in India, they don't eat eggs, but they do dairy. Right. But there's an entire spectrum. Some eat eggs, no dairy. Some eat dairy, no eggs. Some eat eggs and dairy. And then there's offshoots of that, which are now called pescatarian diets. And those are people who will eat fish. There's also people who will eat living things that aren't sentient, like oysters. Just as an example, oysters don't have a brain or a spinal column or a nervous system. So they're not really considered an animal. They're more closer related to a mushroom than to a fish. I guess if you're looking at it that way. So there's some people who include those. There's some people who will include a supplement that has an animal an animal product in it just because it's a supplement and it's good for health. The really staunch vegans will not consider any of that. Like, it doesn't matter if it comes from an animal. No. So those are the big differences.
Thank you. So, the supplement part of it that you mentioned, because many of my patients in India who are vegetarian, they won't even take a fish oil capsule. So it's very difficult to get their omega-3s. And so this is the important thing that is going back to things that are missing. So from a vegetarian vegan diet, if you're not supplementing, vitamin B12 deficiency is extremely common, and B12 is very intimately related to mental health. Iron is related to mental health. Protein and omega-3s, I mentioned omega-3s just now, these are usually missing. So my point is, Michal, as a clinician, I always have to remain objective and not let my personal biases get in the way. So if someone wants to be vegan or vegetarian, my usual recommendation is eat the best quality diet that you want, that you are, that you are comfortable with. But if there are things that are missing from your food, and the other caveat I must mention is, it's not that people who eat meat and fish always don't have any nutritional deficiencies, because again, everything goes back to the quality. And so, and what I mentioned at the beginning is not just the quality and how much your body needs. And in one of the other videos, in the video on supplements that was a few months ago, I talked about the difference between therapeutic levels of nutrients versus just meeting the RDA. That I'm not talking about that today. But if you are not getting the results that you expect by making major changes to your food, adding a few supplements, it is important to figure out what is really going on. So here is where, Michal, I think our approach of individualized, medicine, individualized wellness recommendations, individualized lifestyle recommendations matter so much, because we can figure out exactly, where the challenges are. And this is always a conversation with you, if you are my patient, we decide and come up with a plan together. It's not like I'm going to be a whole lot less prescriptive now, Michal, because I realize even with food and supplements, I'm more prescriptive. So if these are missing from your food, and for all of these, now for protein requirement, Michal, will you say a little bit about how much protein should people take, and how do they know whether they're getting adequate protein, whether it is vegetarian, vegan, or non-vegetarian?
People are not getting adequate protein. That's all I will start with that. There's a lot of talk and a lot of chatter, if you're looking online, about that we don't need a lot of protein, and protein isn't good for us, and all of those things. And there's this minimum requirement for protein that people have taken as the optimal requirement for protein, which is not, right? Protein is not an energy source in your body generally, and protein cannot be stored. And every single part of your body is, the structure of it is all protein. So it's really important. And the amount of protein that each one of us needs is determined for the most part by our physical structural size. So not necessarily how fat or thin you are, but structurally where you are. And there are some quick and easy ways to work it out. There's also a lot of online calculators, because most of the calculations are done for lean body mass, right? For your structure, not for your fat. So that being said, if you want an easy way to work it out, I would say minimum would be 0.6 grams per pound of total body weight. So if you weighed, let's say you weighed 150 pounds, then you would need 60% of that in protein grams. So it would be 90 grams of protein. That's not 90 grams of food. That's 90 grams of protein. And just as an example, if we're looking at, and I'm going to use meat because it's easy, if we're looking at 5 or 6 ounces of meat, we're looking at around 40 grams of protein.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're looking at 90 grams of protein, we're probably looking at around 14 ounces a day, which is so I'm just trying to convert to grams. It's just under 400 grams of meat a day. Now, when you're dealing with vegetarian sources of protein, this is where we run into big problems, because all non-meat sources of protein are attached to incredibly large amounts of carbohydrate. So much larger amounts of carbohydrate than protein. 1 cup of chickpeas, for example, I think has 16 grams of protein in it, and it has around 40 grams of carbohydrate, right? It's a lot. And what do we know about anything that's a carbohydrate eventually turns to sugar in your bloodstream? And we're talking specifically mental health. We know unequivocally that high blood sugar or highly fluctuating blood sugar is incredibly detrimental to not only brain function, but mental health. So this is the vegan vegetarian dilemma.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mikhail. So again, people have a lot of concerns about, eating too much protein is going to affect their kidneys. It doesn't. So this discussion is not about that, but Mikhail and I will always talk about, prioritize protein, even before you look at reducing your carbohydrate intake. I struggle with protein intake as well. So yes, Mikhail.
I just want to say something which is very interesting. When you, just as you said that, and I apologize for interrupting, but when people prioritize their protein, and when you get that protein right, everything else falls into place very easily. And if you really, so all living beings, and I want to talk about this because it's super interesting, if I may, all living beings on this planet strive to get protein, right? We're all, every single thing, every plant, every animal, everything is made up of a matrix of protein structure to some degree. And what we need every single day in order to grow, repair, restore, and function is protein. So your appetite, there is a theory that has actually been quite proven in animals, and they're doing lots of studies on them in humans right now, is that our appetite is very much regulated by our protein consumption. And our appetite will not be satiated until we have reached our protein needs for the day. So if you're eating bread and butter, okay, and don't blame the butter for what the bread did, just saying, but if you're eating bread and butter, which has very little protein in it, and if you think about it, at a restaurant, you can't stop eating the bread bowl. You can't, it doesn't, and then you're still hungry afterwards, and then you'll go home and sit down and watch some TV and have some popcorn or eat some chocolate, and you'll eat and eat and eat and eat until your belly is so distended and you just can't eat anymore, and you're still, in your brain, you're still hungry, and it's like, why am I still hungry? And it's because that protein isn't right. And getting that protein right tends to allow everything else to fall into place. So if you're looking to reduce your carbohydrate load, getting your protein right will naturally do that. It crowds, it takes the place.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mikhail. So the other thing is, most importantly, since we're talking about mental health today, what I suggest to people is, rather than, do I do this? Should I do that? Should I do that? I said, just self-experiment. And personally as well, I have found that when I eat meat in the evening meal for supper, I sleep better. And many people have, and I'm sure you've had this experience as well, when they start eating more protein, mentally they feel better. So here we're talking only about mental health today, but protein is very important for so many other things, for your bone health. So what happens when you are, let us say, when you're not eating adequate protein? What the body decides is it's going to prioritize. It is going to prioritize the functions of the body that are like mission critical. Now, sometimes the body, in such a situation, the body decides bones are not mission critical, because very likely, this is a famine, you're not getting enough food. Because if you look back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, it was like, if they didn't have enough protein, that means they either couldn't hunt or, something like that happened. So then if the body has to prioritize, then the immune system and the brain function, heart function, those are higher priority. The bones can take a back seat, or even your immune system sometimes, because the immune system is very high, in the amount of energy it uses. So it's going to decide, let me not, prioritize those things. I have to just keep the person just barely alive, so to say. Bones and anything else can take a backseat. So those are the things that the body may decide to prioritize if you're not getting enough protein. And there is no easy way to know, like, I'm just going to do this one test. And if your serum proteins are low, then definitely your protein intake is definitely a factor. But for the lesser versions of low protein, it's not really going to show up so much in your blood. You will know from going through your food and finding out how much protein you're actually getting. So one more thing, Mikhail, whenever I talk about vegetarians not getting enough protein and getting a huge dollop of carbohydrates, I'm always told about there is so much protein in lentils. So Mikhail, will you just mention how much protein is there in a cup of lentils? Sorry, you're muted.
About 18 grams, I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 24 at maximum. It depends on the lentils.
And also it depends on how it is cooked, I guess, because the Indian lentil version is kind of watered down, the dal. So
yeah. Anyway, it's not that much, not like meat. And if you think about it calorically, right, to get the same amount of protein, you need to eat a lot more lentils.
And get a whole lot more carbohydrates. So.
Right. So I know people have been so focused on the fat, and it's not the fat that, I mean, there are types of fats that are a problem, but it's not really the fat that's a problem. It's the carbohydrate.
Okay. So I'm going back to sharing my slide. So this is what we were talking about. Now, this is again an association study. So we talked about that. But, because this picture shows it much better. So those who had, so this was a study done between, in the US and in South Korea, where they looked at the macronutrients. So macronutrient intake is carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And here they did not differentiate between what type of fat or any of that. So what I wanted to highlight here is the odds for depression were higher when carbohydrate intake was higher, and they were the lowest when the protein intake was, depended on the protein intake. And this was the fat intake. Again, fat, we don't know the differentiation. So what I wanted to highlight is there are studies showing that higher carbohydrate intake is related to more of depression. So again, bottom line is, depends on what is going on with you, what is your goal. And most importantly, Mikhail, mental health is one area, but most patients who come to me don't come with just one problem. Like the only problem they have is they have some anxiety or they have some depression. No, they very likely have a problem with body weight. They have a problem with hypertension. They have a problem with, maybe diabetes or blood glucose levels, which are going higher. So when Mikhail and I talk about, what is the food that works best for you, we are not looking at only from one perspective. We are looking from, the overall, what is required for you. Like, let us say if we give you some recommendation, which is going to raise your blood glucose levels, and you end up having diabetes, that is definitely not going to help you, because having diabetes is not going to help your mental health at all. So that is what. So this is the hangry monster, Mikhail. You mentioned a little while ago. This is just a picture showing that. So when you eat, your blood glucose levels and insulin go up. And you can see this looks like the teeth of a monster. So 3 meals, and I've just added one snack. Each time you do that, this keeps going up. Your blood glucose levels keep going up. Versus when you're fasting, your blood glucose levels remain constant. And again, the other big thing is the difference between when you eat protein versus when you eat fat versus when you eat carbohydrates. Carbohydrates raise your blood glucose levels the most. Protein is way lower and fat is the least. And of course, when you're not eating, your blood glucose levels don't go up. So if you want an even-keeled blood glucose response, which is also related to an even-keeled mood, a more even-tempered mood, less of anxiety, less of depression, one of the first things I suggest always to my patients is change what you're eating now. Depends, and again, depends on what they're eating now. So if instead of eating 6 times a day, 3 meals and 3 snacks, uh, what if you started prioritizing protein at your meals? And what would end up happening is, number one, you won't feel as hungry. So you won't be able to eat as much because protein is much more satiating. Satiety is very important. The other flip side is with all the processed food, there's a doctor in the UK who calls them blissy foods. They are blissy foods. They don't give you satiety. They just want you to eat more and more. So obviously, anyone who manufactures that kind of food wants to make sure that you keep wanting them more. You know, so satiety is related more to protein and to some extent to fat intake. So Mikhail, did I get that right? Because I learned that from you.
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's a combination, right?
Yeah. And as you always say, in nature, there is no combination of carbohydrate and fat, right?
Oh, no, it's all manufactured. Well, there is. And those are the things we can't stop eating, like nuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, the other thing is, many of you may have noticed it, the fattier the nut, the less you are able to eat. So something like cashews have more carbohydrates than, let us say, something like macadamia. And this is again from my personal experience. I cannot eat a whole lot of macadamia, but cashews I can eat quite a lot. So Mikhail, have you seen that in your clients as well?
Yes, because yes, 100%. Cashews are everybody's kryptonite nut, right? We eat we can't stop eating cashews, but we can't eat as many macadamias. Even hazelnuts, we can't eat as many.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing comes, what are the harmful stuff that is there in your food which might contribute to your mental health challenges? So this is again, there are a whole lot of chemicals which are called hormone disruptors, and hormones have a huge impact on your mental health. So DEHT and DINCH, DINCH and DET, are two hormone disrupting chemicals. So this was a study from Texas. They looked at, and again, this is like, doesn't matter really which fast food chain, all of them are same. So, you know, Mikhail, this one always reminds me. A few years ago, I was talking about, some contaminants in antibiotics in the meat in, one particular place in India. And someone quickly pointed out, I don't live in that place. I'm so glad that I don't live there. And then I had to point out, no, this study was done there. That does not mean that the other places the meat is absolutely fine without antibiotics. So sometimes you have to explain what the study is doing. So my point is, if this is a study done in Texas, it doesn't mean that the burgers in Alberta are any better. So this, again, you can see the high amount of DEHT in them and the amount of DINCH in them. And there are so lots of stuff. Even the gloves actually contain a whole lot of hormone disrupting chemicals. And when it touches food, it is going to get transferred to it. So yes, maybe one meal, you're not going to get a huge dollop of, some hormone disruptors from the gloves, but over a period of time, it can accumulate. And there are lots of studies which have shown the impact of hormone disrupting chemicals on the development of the brain in children. Again, I'm not going into hormone disruptors today because it is complex. It's like we are exposed to a soup. So it's like, is BPA the only problem? No, BPA is not the only problem. There are dioxins, parabens, and most of these come from the food, the can linings, if you're having canned food, the plastic food containers, a whole lot of things. And like I said, the gloves as well. So there are other studies which have shown a lot of the fast food and processed food and, food with long shelf lives, they have a ton of preservatives, coloring agents, enzymes, and things which are going to preserve them long term so that they don't rot. Those have been found to be associated with worse health outcomes, worse mental health conditions as well. So this is one thing I wanted to highlight, some more added things that you are getting, which you did not really bargain for. And what are the different pathways affected? Now, we know that inflammation is intimately related to your mood issues. Gut-brain axis, your gut is your second brain. So obviously what you eat will have an impact on how you feel. Satiety, Mikhail has talked about. The other thing is the body weight set point, and I don't want to go into all the, the nerdy details. So one of the things that happens is if you eat food that is not satiating, so not high in protein and good quality fat, you're eating more of carbohydrates, your body misses that, of when it should stop eating, number one. The other thing is many of these, poor quality food like substances have also been associated with changing your body weight set point. That means your body is comfortable at a certain weight, and whatever you do to reduce your body weight, for some time it may go down, but then it keeps coming back to it. And the same thing applies to people who are underweight as well. So I'm not going into body weight today because that's not directly related to mental health, but these are some of the most important things. And bottom line, what I would recommend is each person is different. What applies to me will not apply to you, will not apply to your friend. And particularly, if one friend or relative has got fantastic results from doing one particular, kind of diet, and you are not getting the same results, it could be for very important reasons, because what works for one may not work for another. And we are going to open for questions now. Michal, any last comments you want to add before? And for the questions, you can raise your hands and I will unmute you, or you can even type in the chat box, or in the Q&A. Anything is fine. Michal, any last comments?
Food is complicated.
It wasn't before. What?
Well, I think it's simple. If you really get down to basics, but people complicate it for themselves a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the grocery stores, everything that's available to us is out to hijack us. Mm-hmm. So it's, that's what makes it complicated. If you can just stick to food that doesn't have a package or doesn't have ingredients, you're good to go. You really are good to go. But that's incredibly difficult to do in our current food environment. So even that just gives you anxiety.
So if we don't have any questions, there's one question I have for you, Michal, because we've talked about it before. So what about the carnivore diet for mental health? And will you tell our audience what the carnivore diet is?
Okay, so a carnivore diet, and there's a few renditions of it, but so it's the exact opposite of a vegan diet. So as a vegan diet has no animal product in it at all, a carnivore diet has no plant product in it at all, nothing. That means no olive oil. That means no herbs and spices. That means nothing. So it consists of meat, chicken, fish, eggs. Some people can include dairy or not, salt, water. That's pretty much, at its basic level, that's pretty much it. There are renditions of it where people add some spices, people add some plants from a therapeutic perspective, because we know that plants can be very therapeutic. There's also some parts where they add something like honey, which is still an animal product, but not a plant, or some fruit, even not sweet fruits, which would be things like avocados or olives or squashes, those types of things. It was developed basically as the ultimate elimination diet, because one of the few things that we don't respond to, or the gut doesn't react to, is meat, because once it's dead, it's dead. It doesn't have any chemicals in it, and it's incredibly nutrient dense. A lot of people have used it now there is some research, but not lots, because they've only started researching it. I mean, there were people who've been doing this for years, for decades, for years. There were even some explorers who did it in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This is all documented, but it goes against everything that conventional medicine tells us. Now, from a mental health perspective, a lot of people have found it incredibly, incredibly helpful. And one of the reasons is that it stops the blood sugar swings in a similar way to a ketogenic diet, which we know is very good for mental health. This has been studied multiple times in many ways for many mental health conditions. So it is an option. It is, again, very simple, not easy. And it definitely goes through stages, and I don't necessarily see it as, and each person is different, that you should just eat meat and nothing else for the rest of your life, right? If you can eat plants and they don't bother you at all, why wouldn't you? But it really does, again, focus on prioritizing that protein and that fat from meat, that those saturated fats and the omega-3s that we get in meats, that we know both of which are very helpful for the brain. So that's a very, very short rendition of it. If anybody wants to know more, they can ask questions.
So we have one question about, so I'm just going to read the question out. Could you talk a bit about autoimmune diseases, food, and mental health? So this is thank you very much for that question, because many autoimmune conditions are related to poor mood. So it could be Hashimoto's, it could be lupus, it could be rheumatoid arthritis, and it's not always related to just because you're dealing with a chronic condition. Like rheumatoid arthritis, it's not just the pain that is related to mental health challenges, depression, and more anxiety. It's also the inflammation. So thyroid particularly, one of the very important factors about thyroid and autoimmunity and mood issues is thyroid is related to depression. And sometimes we found that managing thyroid better improves your mood a whole lot more. And one misconception people have is about thyroid and body weight, but this is not about thyroid. So food is very important in any autoimmune conditions. I didn't talk today much about gluten. So in my functional medicine world and in Mikhail's world, in our world, what we always suggest to any person who comes to us with any autoimmune condition is we start with food. Now, food, as you know, for you to get any autoimmune condition, few things have to come together. One is you have to have the genes for it, but you had the genes since birth, but you don't have an autoimmune condition at birth. Next is, of course, an immune system dysfunction. The third is a trigger. And most of the time, we don't always know what the trigger is, except we know that in celiac disease, it is gluten. But some of these additives from food and these colorings and enzymes and things like that, those could be triggers. We don't know for sure. The fourth thing is something called gut barrier dysfunction or leaky gut. So these four things have to come together for you to develop an autoimmune condition. And that would, and again, the gut-brain immune system dysfunction, then the inflammation, all these things impact your autoimmune. And I am just saying autoimmune condition talking about all the 80 to 100 of them. So now I have, initially when I was new to this field of food as medicine, I would have to, let me go and check the research on whether this particular disease has anything to do with food and whether there's a study supporting it. Now I know that there is no disease on earth that cannot get better with a better lifestyle, with better food to start off with. So I have no qualms about talking about good food for any condition and not have to go back and check the research. And most interestingly, there is research for everything which supports it. So yes, for any autoimmune condition. Now, what kind of diet will you need which takes care of both your autoimmunity and your mental health challenges? That is for a one-on-one conversation, but doing a very basic elimination diet of taking away gluten, dairy, soy, corn, processed food, sugar, caffeine, alcohol, and then most important part comes in the reintroduction. Now, never reintroduce gluten if you have an autoimmune condition because it is related to leaky gut. And interestingly, some people have found, many of my patients, that some of them have thyroid antibodies before they actually develop hypothyroidism. And when they get off of gluten, the thyroid antibody levels have fallen down. So that has been, and there are studies to support that, not just my personal experience with patients. So yes, food is extremely important. So basic elimination diet. Do you need a more, even more stricter elimination? That is again for a conversation one-on-one with your provider. Mikhail, anything else you'd like to add? Food, autoimmunity, and mood?
Well, that's honestly where what I just spoke about a lot of the trends of that started, is that people were going on them and finding that it was curing their, or not curing, it was managing their autoimmunity a whole lot better. And any chronic illness is going to create depression and anxiety. It's not pleasant to be living with illness. So, so all chronic long-term illness is related to food, and all chronic long-term illness is related to mental health. So it's a triangle.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? And if any of you would like to ask a question rather than type, just raise your hand and I will unmute you. Okay, we have, okay, I'll allow you to talk. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot to both of you all. I have a question. So someone who is then ethical vegan, what options do they have? Since you said protein is such an important aspect in mental health.
Michal, I'll let you answer that.
Supplement. It's the only option.
Yeah.
Is supplement. Finding a very high quality, very well processed protein powder is the only way. And there are some really good ones on the market. Bear in mind that when you are consuming a protein powder from a vegetarian source, from a vegan source, like a pea protein, that you're not absorbing 100% of that protein. You're probably only absorbing, pea is one of the highest, you're probably only absorbing around 67 to 70% of that protein. So just something to bear in mind. But it is the only way, is to adequately and appropriately supplement. Same as B12, same as omegas. You gotta.
Thank you, Michal. Yeah, that's the only time when we stress upon supplements very, very much more, because ideally you should get everything from your food, but that's not always possible. Like, in the veganism, definitely that's not possible. But even, though we are talking about veganism, even people who are non-vegetarian, most of them are not getting all their nutrients. So it's not just only for vegans, it's for everybody. But yeah, that is one area where supplementation is like, it's the only way out, actually. I don't see. And Michal, I don't know whether you get a pushback. I get a lot of pushback from my, doctor colleagues. Oh, you're talking about giving something which is not natural. I said, yeah, what can we do?
Well, I'm going to say that not everything that's not natural is bad for us, because if we're only going to do things that are natural, then don't heat your house with with heat. Don't put your air conditioner on. Don't drive your car, right? And don't drink filtered water, because none of that is natural. So, never take an antibiotic when you have an infection, so die. Like those kinds of things, right? It's taken to the extreme. We live longer and healthier because of modern technology many times. And when we make certain decisions, we can use modern technology to support our decisions rather than just defaulting to modern technology because we don't want to put in the work or the effort.
Thank you. So does it answer your question, Adine?
He's
muted.
Sorry, breaking off. Maybe you could type, because we can't hear you. Okay, if you don't have any more questions, I'm going to end our session today. Okay, so it did answer your question. I know it's, Adine, I have so many vegetarian patients, and it's like, I feel as if I'm like, recommending a supplement, but there's no other way. I'm so sorry.
It has to be done. It's, the same as with any diet at all. We look at where you're getting your most nutrients and where you're deficient, or where your body is deficient, or whatever that might be. So it's all right, and it's fine.
Thank you. So see you all next month. December is holiday season, and Michal, we're going to talk about one of our favorite subjects, intermittent fasting, and how to deal with the holiday season using time-restricted eating and intermittent fasting.
Love it.
Both of those are very important for brain health.
Yes, love it. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much for investing your time with us. And now the other thing is about the recording. Now, when Zoom tells me that you will receive a recording at the end, what I don't understand is whether you receive it right away or are you going to receive it at the end of the 6 months, the 6 webinars that I have scheduled. But I'm going to send a separate email. So please forgive me if you're receiving the same recording twice. But I have not found a way to figure out whether Zoom is doing it now or it's going to wait until the end of, I don't know. I think we scheduled up till June, right? I don't remember. Anyway, so you are going to receive a recording. You might end up receiving 2. So forgive me for that. And thank you very much. Bye now. Bye, Mikhail.
Bye.
Bye.